So thank you all for coming. This is our last winter webinar series of the year. This is winter webinar number 5. I will introduce Eric and then he will get going. So Eric is born and raised in Saskatoon and has deep personal roots in the Meewasin Valley. A recent graduate of the Renewable Resource Management program at the University of Saskatchewan, he feels fortunate to contribute to the conservation of the grasslands he grew up in. Outside of work, Eric enjoys exploring the Meewasin Valley by bike and longboard, and especially by kayak and canoe. He is excited to be here today to discuss some of the aquatic invasive species he has encountered in the valley, as well as potential threats and that may arrive in the future. So we're looking forward to Eric's presentation today. I just want to acknowledge that Meewasin is on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis, and I also really want to thank the Grandy family for allowing the Friends of the Valley to do these fun webinars this winter. So without further ado, Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Katie. So like Katie was saying, I'm originally from Saskatoon. I absolutely love our river valley. And as the weather starts to warm up, I know that for me personally, it's that time that I know I might be pulling out my canoe or kayak, hopefully in the next coming weeks. I find exploring the valley through the water provides such a unique experience. You're able to see a wide variety of plants and animals that you wouldn't normally get to see. And you get to also enjoy the scenery in a kind of a relaxed pace and connect with nature in a very meaningful way. But I've also noticed that exploring the river, exploring the river valley by paddle offers also unique opportunity, and that is to look out for aquatic invasives that are threatening our local ecosystems. In this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some current threats that have already arrived, but also some threats that might be coming down the pipeline. So the purpose of today's webinar is hopefully to inform you of some of the invasives you should be on the lookout for, and maybe some identification techniques that you can use. We're also going to look into a little bit how the spread of invasives is occurring, and also maybe some different ways that we can help to either remove them or at least to properly monitor their spread. So let's get into it. So from a very kind of general lens, aquatic invasive species are plant species that are not native to local waters. They're introduced from other regions, often unintentionally through human activities. And once they enter a new environment, they can spread very quickly because they don't typically have a natural predator or controls in that ecosystem. These plants often grow fast and more aggressively than native species, which allows them to take over space for sunlight and nutrients. And as a result, they outcompete native aquatic plants, reducing biodiversity and changing how that ecosystem functions. Many introductions of these aquatic invasive happen because of human activity, whether that be boating, fishing, aquarium dumping, or water transport systems that move plant fragments between different water bodies. So our first invasive that we're going to look at is purple loosestrife, and I'm sure that's one that most people are familiar with. Purple loosestrife is a wetland plant, scientific name Lytherium salicaria. It originates from Europe and Asia, where it is part of the natural ecosystem. It was introduced to North America as an ornamental, where it spread beyond the gardens and the horticultural practices into our natural wetlands. This plant is extremely hardy. It's a long-lived perennial, meaning it survives for many years and will regrow each season from that same original root system. Because of its strong growth and ability to spread quickly, it has become extremely invasive in many parts of Saskatchewan. So in Saskatchewan, it is officially designated as a noxious plant under the Weed Control Act. So we're going to look at a few characteristics that help us in identifying purple loosestrife. It's very easy to recognize purple loosestrife because of its bright purple flower spikes, which are tall and very noticeable in wetlands. It typically blooms from mid to late summer, making it especially visible during that time of the year. The plants can grow quite tall and are usually between 1 to 2.5 meters, which helps to dominate all the other plants that surround it. Its stem And this is maybe one of the best identifying features of it is square shaped, which means that if you look at that picture here, you can see, hopefully see, 4 distinct edges on that stem. And if you see one out in the wild, that's a telltale sign that it is purple loosestrife. But sometimes we're not very fortunate. We might come across it when it hasn't came into bloom yet. So another technique that we like to use to identify it is looking at how the leaves connect to the stem. So they don't have any stalks. It attaches directly to the stem and clasps it. The leaves also grow in opposite pairs along the stem, and near the base, they can appear in a circular grouping called whorls. You might have came across some plant species that look like purple loosestrife. So the most common one that typically gets confused with purple loosestrife is fireweed. Um, they're sometimes confused because they both have tall stems and they have that purple colored flower. Fireweed is an incredible native species that we have. It helps support a variety of wildlife, including pollinators such as bees. So we always want to try, whenever possible, to make sure that we're correctly identifying purple loosestrife before pulling it. But fortunately, once it does start to bloom, we can start to look at the flowers and how spaced out they are. So in fireweeds, the flowers will always be more spaced out as compared to purple loosestrifes that has these very tight clusters. Another technique that we can use to maybe to differentiate them earlier on in the season is that fireweed has alternate leaves, which is a pattern of single leaf grows at each node along the stem, with the leaves alternating sides. So now let's look at maybe some different characteristics that purple loosestrife has in regards to why it spreads so aggressively. First off, it produces an enormous amount of seeds. A single mature plant can produce between 2 to 2.7 million seeds every year. The seeds are extremely small, about the size of ground pepper, and they have a very high germination rate, which means many of them will eventually, if able to spread, will start to germinate and start to spread that way. Even more concerning, I think, is that these seeds can remain alive in the soil for up to 20 years, making the long-term controls of different infestations extremely difficult once they've been established. In addition to the seeds, purple loosestrife also has a thick woody taproot and will grow horizontal rhizomes underground. So from a single plant, we could expect up to 30 to 50 new shoots each year, allowing it to quickly form a dense patch. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, it can also regenerate from fragments. So small pieces of the roots and the stem can break off and be carried by water or animals. And this will allow them to spread into new regions extremely quickly. So unfortunately, that's something we have to be very aware of as we paddle through, and always making sure to properly wash our boats if we're going into new bodies of water. So let's look at some of the impacts. Purple loosestrife forms extremely dense strands, meaning it'll grow into these very thick clusters over a large area and will begin to crowd out other plants. This leads to a replacement of native plants, and that's particularly a problem because oftentimes our native species depend on those areas for food and shelter. And as the native plants begin to disappear, animals such as birds and amphibians lose that habitat, which just further reduces biodiversity and continues to weaken the ecosystem. And so maybe a way of thinking about this is to think about our ideas of fundamental niches versus realized niche. So fundamental niche is the full range of conditions that a species can live within, free of any competition. A realized niche is the real world. It's where species actually have a very specific niche that they can survive in, with the threats of competition and other factors present. So purple loosestrife is extremely competitive and aggressive, which allows it to expand its realized niche very close to its fundamental niche. And at the same time, it pushes out native plants out of their habitats, which also then shrinks their realized niches. This means that native plants can no longer live in those areas that they normally would, simply because they're being outcompeted. So if we look here, we have an example, maybe one plant beginning to grow. Maybe the next year, after some of those rhizomes have spread, we start to see a dense patch. And if left untreated, purple loosestrife can envelop entire areas extremely quickly. And so that's how purple loosestrife doesn't just take up space and kind of limit plant growth that way. It's actually changing how different species are interacting with the environment. So for our next invasive, we're going to be looking at flowering rush. Flowering rush is native to Europe and Asia. It's typically found in shallow waters and along shorelines. It was introduced in North America through ship ballasts and planted in gardens as an ornamental, and eventually made its way into our waterways. It can grow partially submerged and also along the edges of different water bodies. And in Saskatchewan, flowering rush is designated as a prohibited plant under the Weed Control Act. That designation means that every effort must be made to prevent its spread and eradicate it where possible. So let's take a look at some of the characteristics of flowering rush. We typically see that flowering rush can be identified by its distinct pink flowers that grow in umbrella-shaped clusters at the top of the stem. The leaves are long and narrow, and they resemble grass, making it easy to confuse it with other aquatic invasives, or sorry, other just aquatic plants. A key identifying feature is that the leaves are triangular if you look at the cross sections. The plants typically grow between 1 and 1.5 meters tall. And yeah, flowering rush typically will form dense clumps, which can begin to indicate that there's an invasion beginning to spread. So looking at some of the reasons why flowering rush is so aggressive and such a problem, we can first look at its rhizomes. So similar to purple loosestrife, it grows rhizomes, which is an extremely thick stem that is underground. You can see here in that picture, one of those rhizomes that was removed. So these will grow outwards from the plant and produce new shoots. And if one of these pieces breaks off, they can form an entirely new plant. Even very small fragments have been known to regrow and regenerate, making removal extremely challenging. They also have bulbils, which are small plant-like buds. Flowering rush will typically form these on the roots and sometimes on different parts of the flower. These bulbils can detach and float in the water, and as they drift, they settle into new areas, which will eventually grow into new plants. So one of the main ways that flowering rush is propagated is through water movement. That means that these plant fragments will go with the current into new areas, begin to spread that way, making it extremely difficult to kind of control it, because even the act of removing flowering rush is sometimes unintentionally helping it spread. And another thing that we notice a lot is human activity, which will unintentionally spread flowering rush. So whether that be boats that might be passing through the area and have certain plant parts attached to those boats, it just makes it extremely difficult and challenging to deal with. And once again, a good reminder to always be making sure that we're washing our boats in between movements. So if we were to look at the impacts of flowering rush, one of the biggest issues is that it forms such a thick underwater mat. So these dense growths can cover large areas beneath the water surface that we aren't particularly able to see. These mats will block sunlight, and that means that just native plants that rely upon kind of there being established tiers within our water systems will immediately feel the impact of flowering rush moving into the area. Without sunlight, many of our native plants cannot photosynthesize properly and will begin to die off. This also has a consequence to fish habitat. So our fish rely upon our native plants for shelter and breeding areas, food sources. So when those plants begin to disappear, fish populations can be impacted. And in addition to these environmental impacts, flowering rush infestations will also affect how the population is able to use that water body. So dense plant growth can make boating and fishing and swimming extremely difficult and maybe even unsafe. And it also means that flowering rush is having both a recreational interruption as well as interruptions to the natural ecosystem. But there is some good news. So I should maybe think about how I say good news when I'm talking about invasives. The Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan spearheaded early response efforts when flowering rush was detected in the province. So the first major population was found near Watrous in 2002. After its discovery, the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan and partner organizations quickly launched a coordinated 10-year eradication program. And the goal was to completely remove the flowering rush from that site before it could spread. And ultimately, the effort was successful. The Watrous population was eradicated. However, there is still ongoing monitoring that is being conducted to make sure that it doesn't return to that area. But it also brought into play the fact that these infestations are starting to creep up a little bit all over Saskatchewan. So primarily, flowering rush has been detected at Coulterham Creek Reservoir and in the Esterhazy area, as well as the Gainsborough Creek in the Bellegarde area, and along certain sections of the South Saskatchewan River. So the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, along with other partners, have begun a monitoring program to essentially detect where flowering rush is beginning to spread to. And that brings us on to our final invasive, Himalayan balsam. Absolutely love the nicknames Himalayan balsam got, Policeman's Helmet and Touch Me Not. We'll see a little bit later on why it is that we gave them some of these nicknames. And the reason why I wanted to include Himalayan balsam is because it's one that actually currently isn't found in Saskatchewan, but it was recently designated as a prohibited plant under the Weed Control Act, which means that the government is starting to prepare for invasions coming in from our partnering or our neighboring provinces. So it's something to be on the lookout for. It's an annual plant that is originally from the Himalayan regions of Asia. In North America, it has become extremely invasive in areas that have moist soil. So it's commonly found along rivers and streams and wetlands and other damp environments. So some of the characteristics that we might find in Himalayan balsam, it's a plant that produces a pink hooded or helmet-shaped flower, hence the policeman's helmet name. These flowers will typically grow in clusters of about 5 to 10 along each of the stems. It has a long flowering period, typically from June all the way to October, which makes it very noticeable throughout much of the season. The stems can grow quite tall, ranging from 1 to 3 meters in height, and the stems are smooth and hairless, as well as hollow, and quite fragile. So if you walk up to them, they can snap very easily. And this brittleness is also which is a strategy in helping it spread along waterways. So the leaves are about 5 to 10 centimeters long and are lance-shaped with sharply serrated or toothed edges. They sometimes grow opposite of each other on the stem or sometimes in groups of threes. Mature plants, as we can see in this picture up here, will begin to show a red tinged edge along the leaves, which is a fantastic way of identifying them. And if you take some of the leaves and crush them, they release a very strong, musty smell, which is just another good technique to use if you are unsure of what exactly you're looking at. So the main characteristic with Himalayan balsam that allows it to spread extremely easily is that it has seed pods that can explode, for lack of a better word, or eject seeds up to 6 meters away. So each plant is able to produce about 800 seeds, and the seeds are only typically viable for about 18 to 24 months. So it's not like a purple loosestrife that's going for numbers. Really, its specialization is in that exploding seed pod. So disturbances such as the wind, animals, or humans can trigger that ejection of the pods, and that's partially where it gets its name, Touch Me Not. Yeah. So looking at some of the impacts of Himalayan balsam, because it hasn't quite spread to Saskatchewan, I'd love to show you some pictures of Saskatchewan. Actually, I shouldn't say love. I would like if there was more information about Himalayan balsam for Saskatchewan ecosystems, but currently we're more of on a monitoring situation. So Himalayan balsam has several major impacts to river ecosystems along riverbanks. It spreads extremely quickly because of that exploding sea dispersal. And as it spreads, it begins to outcompete native vegetation by growing rapidly and forming dense strands. Once again, similar tactic to some of the other invasives that we saw that block out light and resources to other nearby plants. This photo here is actually an example from Western Sussex River Trust, showing essentially how Himalayan balsam affected the riverbanks. So here we have a photo that was taken in, I believe, July, and we can see that Himalayan balsam has pretty much completely taken over this riverbank. The second photo that we have here is taken in December, and so that shows that as the plants began to die, the soil becomes exposed, leading to wind erosion and water erosion. So this is particularly concerning for riverbanks, as once you begin to that process of erosion, it's extremely difficult to stop it, and to regrow native plants that might be able to reverse that trend, because once again, you're dealing with an invasive that does have approximately 2-year viability for its seed banks, so can pop up and probably will pop up to outcompete any natives that you might plant on those riverbanks. So moving along, we're going to look at a little bit of how we can do removal. So Himalayan balsam and purple loosestrife have a certain shallowness to their roots. They don't grow extremely deep into moist soils, which makes it possible to hand pull them or dig them out. But when we're doing that, it's extremely important that we're making sure to take out the entire root system. Otherwise, these plants have been known to regenerate. And it's typically best to do any digging or hand pulling before the seeds produce, or before the plants produce any seeds, just making sure that we're not shaking the plant and helping the seeds spread. But if we're past the point of the seeds maturing, one of the ways that we can also deal with them is by cutting the flowering heads. So this will help to produce or to reduce the spread of the invasives, but it's something that has to be done regularly for it to be effective. And so it's more of a last-ditch effort to control invasives. And an important element, and this is the reason why I show a heavy-duty bag, is with any aquatic invasives that you might be removing, you're going to be dealing with an extremely heavy root system. You're going to be digging up a whole bunch of wet soil, and as much as possible, we try to avoid whacking that root ball around and try to loosen up some of that soil, just because we are actually, in those cases, helping the invasive spread. So most of the time, we want to try to remove it, and then try to remove any soil by hand, and then making sure that we're putting them in large plastic bags. And I show heavy duty ones because these bags will get extremely heavy pretty quickly. It's one of those things that if you are planning on doing eradication, it's always best to come prepared, rather than, just try to put a little bit into, maybe a grocery bag that you have lying around, and for that bag to rip, and then us to be inadvertently spreading those invasives that way. And another important factor is to make sure that as we remove invasives, that we're throwing them away at the landfill, always avoiding any kind of a compost, and trying as best as possible to avoid leaving any plant parts in the water or on the ground, as that can cause them to regrow. And you might have noticed that I didn't really talk about any removal for flowering rush. Flowering rush is particularly problematic because anytime that you try to remove it, most of the time, if not done correctly, you're actually helping it spread. So because flowering rush is so problematic, the best way to deal with it is to report it. So you can either report it to the local RM that you find the plants in, and hopefully they pass along that information to the weed inspector. But if you go to the councils, most of the time they will know the proper protocols. You can also report it to the Meewasin Valley Authority, the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan. And one of the things, if you're maybe pressed for time and you just have a cell phone available, the best way that you can help monitor them is just by inputting them into citizen science apps such as EdMaps or iNaturalist. And that will at least help bring the infestation to the attention of hopefully the local authorities that might be planning on eradicating it. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Awesome. There are a number of questions in the
Oh,
chat. Let me pull
okay.
them up and I will ask them. as we
Here, can
go. So we're gonna start with Sam. So Eric, that stat about 2.7 million seeds is staggering. I'd love to know the methodology behind that. Is that based on a single super plant study, uh, or an average across a certain density?
Yeah, so I wonder if I can actually go back to that presentation. Da, 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 da. Anyways, where they typically get those numbers from is if we're looking at the seed pods, those seed pods can average about 100 seeds each. And so that's just a quick calculation on the average number of seed pods that are produced from a plant. And definitely 2.7 is on the top end of what a typical plant might produce. So maybe keeping in mind that 2 million to 2.7 million is a range. So not every plant will produce that much. But yes, that is typically a purple loosestrife strategy, is to have lots of seeds that are falling close to that mother plant and then being spread in that way. And sorry, I know you
Awesome.
had, sorry, in your field, what's the most deceptive lookalike that you've encountered? Times where you sort of double check the specimen. Oh, okay. So for purple loosestrife, quite fortunate that it does have such distinguishable characteristics to it. One of the things I didn't really mention is that fireweed will typically grow in different areas than purple loosestrife. So once again, purple loosestrifes are more concentrated around those most moist soils. Fireweed will typically be found in more ditch areas. And so we're not really looking at the exact same habitat, but they've been known to occasionally crisscross. So fortunately, I don't think I've ever mistaken fireweed for purple loosestrife, but most of the time I know exactly where to go. So it might not be a fair assumption to say that most people wouldn't make that mistake.
Another
Oh my
one
goodness.
from
Okay.
Sam is lastly,
Sorry,
what does
go
a
ahead.
win look like for Meewasin in the next 5 years regarding aquatic invasives?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting because, like I said, the only one that we currently have in the Meewasin Valley is purple loosestrife. Every effort is being made to make sure that flowering rush never makes it this far. Flowering rush is one of those aquatic invasives that once it begins to spread, it is just so extremely difficult to manage. Removal is extremely difficult, and it spreads so easily just because really any piece of the plant can produce an offspring that will start to grow in a new area. So for me, what I would consider a win for Meewasin is obviously to continue the ongoing monitoring for purple loosestrife all around the valley, and just to really collaborate with partners and see where Meewasin can be a part of doing different surveys for different water bodies around Saskatoon that might occasionally get flowering rush. And once again, for Himalayan balsam, all about monitoring, all about making sure that any time that an invasion is discovered, that it's immediately brought to the attention of the conservation department and hopefully eradicated.
Awesome. Question from Bronwyn is sorry, do you know how close the spread of Himalayan balsam is to Sask? So great segue. And how widespread is it in our neighboring provinces?
Yeah, so I know that Quebec and Ontario have a serious Himalayan balsam problem. Um, I know that it's in Manitoba. As to how close it is yet, I think that's still to be determined. But part of the reason why we know that it's beginning to spread to Saskatchewan is once again that inclusion into the Weed Control Act. The province typically doesn't do that on a whim, so that means that there are colleges that are extremely concerned with its spread, and it's one of the things that we can probably be expecting to find within our waterways within the next few years.
Okay. We do have a raised hand in the audience. So Sam, another Sam, please feel free to ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for the talk, Eric. I have two questions, and I would start with the one that's related to the plants.
Okay.
Did you, when you removed them, and you talked also about the seeds that can stay in the soil, did you ever think about bringing in native seeds to giving native plants maybe an advantage after removing the invasive ones?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Would you like me to answer that, or should we
Yeah,
go?
answer that one first. The other
Okay.
one I think will be fast.
Sure. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting, fascinating way of doing kind of removal of invasive species is, like you say, to start planting native species directly around it. I shouldn't say the infestations, the small groupings of purple loosestrife that we have found within the valley are exact that. They're fairly small. And so because they're not very large at that point, it's best to just remove them and to continue to monitor that site afterwards. But it's definitely something that can be implemented if there are larger patches that were detected, is to maybe go in there and be a little bit more aggressive and to continue monitoring. What I would probably think would be the most effective way of doing it is to go in there and maybe do hand pulling for a year or two, see how that's doing. If you are still noticing that the patch is continuing to spread, that might be maybe a signal to start doing more intensive eradication, as well as, like you say, starting to plant some natives around it to hopefully control the spread of it. Purple loosestrife, though, is just it can grow in so many different ways, either from seed, from those rhizomes. So really the best way of kind of preventing its spread and protecting natives is just that eradication.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And my last question is because I'm doing my PhD on aquatic invasive species, but on zooplankton. So I was wondering, you were talking mainly about the plants, which I guess is because it's about the Meewasin Valley. But do you know anything about invasive, like fish, mussel? I know that zebra mussel is coming more and more to the west, or zooplankton species, invertebrates in the Saskatchewan River.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with different kind of animals that are invasives as well. I do know that there are some that are being carefully monitored. I know that Diefenbaker, if you're familiar with the area, is always ongoing with their monitoring process, because that is really the link to the rest of our waterways. As far as some of the examples that you say, I don't know too much information about those, but yeah, it's something that I think as conservationists, we're always very aware of, that there are going to be other species that are popping up. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam, for those questions. Are there any other questions? Either feel free to throw your hand up or pop them in the chat. There are some great comments, Eric, such as loved the focus on lookalikes. It's easy for the public to accidentally pull the good guys when they're trying to help, so visual guides are awesome. And beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I don't see any more comments or questions in the chat, and there's no raised hands. So thank you, Eric, so much for sharing your presentation on aquatic invasives in the Meewasin Valley today. This is really awesome. Thank you all for attending our last winter webinar again. This is recorded. It'll be posted later today, and then I will send it out to everybody that has registered. So thank you so much, Eric. That's all I got.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.